Section 6 of A Dozen Ways of Love. A Taint in the Blood. Chapter 3. The night was frosty, calm and clear, and quite light, for the March moon was just about to rise from the eastern sea. When the carriage set him down at his own door, the curate had no mind to go in. He waited till the sound of the horses' feet had died away, and then he walked back down the empty street. The town was asleep. His footsteps echoed sharply from roofs and walls. He was not given to morbid fancies or hallucinations, and he was extremely annoyed at what had taken place. Twice in the last 8 days he had been the subject of a waking dream, and now he was confronted with what seemed an odd counterpart of his vision in actual fact. It was no doubt a mere coincidence, but it was a very disagreeable one. Of course, if he saw the old trinket described by Violetta, the chances were that it would be quite different from the setting of the stone which the dead woman wore. But even if the two were exactly the same, what difference could it make? A dream is nothing, and that which appears in a dream is nothing. The coincidence had no meaning. He turned by the side of the church, down the lane which led to the little quay. The tide was halfway up the dark weed, and the fishing boats were drawn near to the quay, ready for the cruise at dawn. Their dark furled sails were bowing and curtsying to one another with all ceremony, like ghosts at a stately ball. To the east and south lay the sea, vacant, except that on the eastern verge stood a palace of cloud, the portals of which were luminous with the light from within, and now they were thrown open with a golden flash, and yellow rays shot forth into the upper heavens, spreading a clear green light through the deep midnight of the sky, where the other worlds wandered. Then the yellow moon came from her palace, wrapping herself at first with a mantle of golden mist, as if, Godiva-like, she shrank from loosening her garments. But the need of the darkling earth pressed upon her, and she dropped her covering and rode forth in nakedness. Everything was more lovely now, for there was light to see the loveliness. The bluff wind that came from the bosom of the sea seemed only to tell of a vast silence and a world asleep. The rocky shore, with its thin line of white breakers, stretched round to the west. About a mile away there was a rugged headland, with some crags at its feet, which had been broken off and rolled down into the sea by the frost demon of bygone years. The smallest was farthest out, and wedged behind it and sheltered by it was the black hulk of a wrecked vessel. This outermost rock lay so that it broke the waves as they came against the wreck, and each was thrown high in a white jet and curl of spray, and fell with a low sob back into the darkness of the sea. The curate turned and walked toward the headland off the cliff path, where he had walked a week before with Violetta. The cliffs were completely desolate, except for some donkeys browsing here and there, their brown hair silvered by the frost. There was a superstition in the town that the place was haunted on moonlight nights by the spirit of a woman who had perished in the wreck. It had been a French vessel, wrecked 5 years before, and all on board were drowned, 6 men and 1 woman, the wife of the skipper. They had all been buried in one grave in the little cemetery that was on top of the headland, and it was easy to see how the superstition of the haunting came about, for as the curate watched the spray on the rock near the wreck rise up in the moonlight and fall back into the sea, he could almost make himself believe that he saw in it the supple form of a woman with uplifted hands, praying heaven for rescue. The wind was pretty rough when he got to the head of land, and he walked up among the graves to find a place where he might be sheltered, and yet have advantage of the view. He knew that close by the edge of the cliff, over the grave of the shipwrecked people, stood a marble cross, large enough to shelter a man somewhat, if he leaned against it. Upon this cross was a long inscription giving a touching account of the wreck, and stating that it was erected by Matilda Moore, wife of the vicar, out of grief for the sad occurrence, and with an earnest prayer for the unknown bereaved ones. The curate was rather fond of reading this inscription, as we all are apt to be fond of going over words which, although perfectly familiar to us, still leave some space for curiosity concerning their author and origin, and he was wondering idly, as he walked, whether there would be light enough from the moon to read them now. The wind came, like the moonlight, from the south-east, and he walked round by the western side of the graveyard in order to come up the knoll on which the cross stood by the sheltered side. Everything around him was intensely bleak and white, for the moon, having left the horizon, had lost her golden light, and the colouring of the night had toned down to white and purple. Patches of wild white cloud were scudding across the pallid purple sky beneath the stars, and there was a silver causeway across the purple sea. The purple was not unlike that of an amethyst. The cliffs sloped back to the town. The boats and peaked roofs and church tower were seen by the sharp outline of their masses of light and shade. The street lamps were not lit in the town because of the moon, and only in 2 or 3 places there was the warm glow of a casement fringed with the rays of a midnight candle. To the left of the cliffs, close to the town, were the trees of the squire's park and the roof of the hall. Perhaps it was because the curate was looking at these things as he walked among the graves that he did not look at the monument towards which he was making his way, until he came within 6 yards of it. Then he suddenly saw that there was another man leaning against it, half hid in the shadow. He stopped at once and stood looking. The man had thrown his arms backward over the arms of the cross, and was leaning, half hanging, upon it. The young priest was inexpressibly shocked and startled by the attitude. He knew that none of the humbler inhabitants of the town would venture near such a place at such a time, nor could he think of anyone else who was likely to be there. Besides, although he could not see the stranger distinctly, he himself was standing in full moonlight, and yet the man in the shadow of the cross made no sign of seeing him. At that moment he would gladly have gone home without asking further question, but that would have looked as if he were afraid. He tried a chance remark. "It's a fine night," he said, as lightly as might be. "Yes," said the other, and moved his arms from the arms of the cross. It was only one word, but the curate recognized the soft voice at once. It was the Jewish rabbi. "I was at one of your services the other day," he said, advancing nearer. "Yes." "I felt sorry your people did not turn out better." There was no answer. "It is a very cold wind," said the curate. "I hardly know why I came out so far." "Shall I tell you?" asked the Jew softly. He spoke good English, but very slowly, and with some foreign accent. "Certainly, if you can." "I desired very much to see you." "But you did not tell me, so that could not be the reason." "Your will could not influence my mind. I assure you I came of my own free will. It would be terrible if one man should be at the mercy of another's caprice." "Be it so. Let us call it chance, then. I desired that you should come, and you came." "But you do not think that you have a power over other men like that?" "I do not know. I find that with some men such correspondence between my will and their thoughts and actions is not rare. But I could not prove that it is not chance. It makes no difference to me whether it be chance or not. I have been thinking of you very much, desiring your aid, and twice you have come to me, as you say, of your own free will. If you have such a power, you may be responsible for a very disagreeable dream I had in your synagogue the other day." "What was the dream?" "Nay, if you created it, you should be able to tell me what it was." "I have no idea what it was. If I influenced your imagination, I did so unconsciously." There was about this Jew such a complete gentleness and repose, such earnestness without eagerness, such self-confidence without self-assertion, that the curate's heart warmed to him instinctively. "I believe you are an honest Christian," said the Jew very simply. "I hope honest Christians are not rare." "I think a wholly honest man is very rare, because to see what is honest it is necessary to look without self-interest or desire." "I am certainly not such a man. The most I can say is that I try to be more honest every day." "That is very well said," said the Jew. "If you had believed in your own honesty, I should have doubted it." Then, in a very simple and quiet way, he told the curate a strange story. He said that he lived in Antwerp. They were 5 in one family, the parents, a sister and brother, and himself. His father and brother did business with the English ships, but he was a teacher and reader in the synagogue. There had been in their family a very sacred heirloom in the form of an amulet or charm. Their forefathers had believed that it came from Jerusalem before their nation lost the holy city. But he himself did not think that this could be true. He only knew that it was ancient and possessed very valuable properties, as a talisman to those who knew how to use it. About 5 years before, his sister, who was beautiful and wayward, had loved and married a French sea captain. The father cursed his daughter, but the mother could not let her go from them under the fear of this curse, and she hung the amulet about her neck as a safeguard. Alas for such safeguard! In a few weeks the captain's ship was wrecked, and all on her were drowned. He said that it was that same ship which lay near them, a wreck among the waves, and his sister lay buried beneath their feet. The family did not hear of the wreck till some time after the burial, and then they knew for the first time what their mother had done with the amulet. His brother came over at once to this town to seek it, but in vain. The people said they had not seen the necklace, that it had certainly not been buried with the girl. The people seemed simple and honest. The brother was a shrewd man, and he believed that they spoke the truth. He returned home in distress. They could not tell what to think, for they knew their sister would not have dared to take off the necklace, and the chain was too strong to be broken by the violence of the waves. Some months after, they heard that there was a young Englishman dying in Antwerp who came from this town. The name of the town was graven on their hearts, and they went to see him. He was a mere boy, a pretty boy, and when they asked him about the wreck, he became excited in his weakness and fever, and told them all the story of it as he had seen it with his own eyes. It was an October afternoon. A storm had been lowering and partially breaking over the town for 3 days, and that day there was a glare of murky light from the cloud that made the common people think that the end of the world was come. When the ship struck, the fisher people ran out of the town to the shore nearest her, and this boy would have run out with them and been among the foremost, but that a very pious and charitable lady of the place had besought him to take her with him. There was a great rain and wind, and it was with difficulty that he led the lady out and helped her down to the shore. By that time the wreck had been dashed to pieces, and the fishermen were bringing in the dead bodies of the crew. There was a woman among them, and when they brought her body in, they did not lay it with the bodies of the sailors, but carried it respectfully and laid it close to the lady, who stood in the shelter of some rocks. The wet clothes had fallen back from her breast. The boy remembered it well, for it had been his first sight of death, and his heart was touched by the girl's youth and beauty. He had not seen her again, for he had gone to help with the boats, and the fishermen's wives had run at the lady's bidding and brought coverings to wrap her in. The Jewish father then told the dying man about the amulet. He said that, to the best of his memory, Some such thing had been about the neck of the dead girl, but that he was certain that none of the fisher people would have been bad enough to steal from the dead. They entreated him to think well what he said, and to consider again if there was no doubtful character there who might have had the opportunity and the baseness to commit the crime. At that the dying man fell into profound thought, and when he looked at them again the fever flush had mounted to his face, and there was a light in his eyes. He told them that if there was any one upon the shore that day who would have done such a thing, it was the very rich and pious lady that he himself had taken to the wreck. She had been alone with the body, when she sent the other women for wrappings. They thought that perhaps his mind was wandering, and left him, promising to return next day. But when they came again, he was dead. "I have learned since I came here," said the Jew, "that he was the son of the old man who lives in the great house down there among the trees." They both looked down at the park. The leafless elms stood up like giant feathers in the white mist of the moonbeams, and the chimney stacks of the house threw a deep shadow on the shining roof. "But we felt," said the Jew, "that even if the judgment of the dying boy were a true one, and this lady had committed the crime, we still had no evidence against her, and that whoever was wicked enough to steal would certainly deny the act, and conceal that which was stolen. Hopeless as it seemed to wait, doing nothing, our only chance of redress would be lost by making any inquiry which might frighten her. We sent a message to the goldsmith in London who mends her jewels, asking him to watch for this necklace, and so we waited. At last we heard news. An amethyst, which we do not doubt is ours, came to the goldsmith to be put in a ring, but there was no necklace with it. I came here to see if I could do something, but I have been here for some time and can devise no plan. If she still possessed the other part, to speak would be to cause its destruction, and how can I find out, without asking, if she still has by her the thing that would prove her crime? Do not be angry with me when I tell you this. Remember, it was not I who presumed to suspect the wife of your priest, but the English boy who knew her well." "Yes," said the curate, "I shall remember that." He had grown tired of standing in the wind, and had sat down on the frosty grass below the cross. The blast was very cold, and he crouched down to avoid it, hugging his knees with his hands. "You are about to be united to the family," said the Jew. "Perhaps you have seen the stone. Will you, for the sake of that justice which we all hope for, try to find out for me if the other part of the amulet still exists? I will give you a drawing of it, and if you find it as I describe, you will know that my tale is true. Remember this, that we have no wish to make the wrong public or punish the wrongdoer. We only want to obtain our property." "Have you got a drawing of it now?" "Yes, I have it here." The curate rose up and took the paper. He lit a match and held its tiny red flame in the shelter of the stone. The paper was soiled and untidily folded, but the drawing was clear. It took but a glance to satisfy him that what he had seen in his dream was but the reflection in his own thought of the idea in the Jew's mind. He did not stop to ask any explanation of the fact. The fact itself pressed too hard upon him. While the match was still burning, he mechanically noticed the Jew's face as it leaned over the paper near his own. Not a handsome face, but gentle and noble in its expression. Then the match went out. It dropped from his hand, a tiny spark, into the grass, and for a moment illuminated the blades among which it fell. End of section 6.